Third speaker for the evening, we have Dr. Margreet Zwarteveen, Professor of Water Governance at UNESCO-IHE Institute for Water Education. Dr. Zwarteveen's research has focused on water allocation, policies and practices, on questions of gender, equity and justice. Her current research looks at reallocation of water from agriculture and rural areas to cities and industries, and explores new investments in irrigation systems along the Nile in Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt. Dr. Zwarteveen coordinates a CGIAR water, land and ecosystem project called Inclusive Water Accounting, and is the Dutch coordinator of an open research area project called DOUBT, short for Delta Dealings with Uncertainties. Welcome, Dr. Zwarteveen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure you're all a bit tired after so many presentations, so I'll try to keep it a bit lively. First of all, let me also join all the other presenters. I'm very happy to be here, my first time in Bangalore, and I'm also very happy to see the great work that ATREE is doing. I've known the work of ATREE for a long time, so I'm very honored to be invited here and to be able to say something. And of course also my sincerest congratulations on the 20th anniversary. What I would like to do today is I would like to talk a little bit about a search of science policy initiatives in water that are emerging on the way of increasing awareness of climate change and increasing environmental awareness. As some of the previous speakers have already said, it's actually very difficult or very costly to precisely know where water is flowing and how it is flowing. So, and at the same time, as also the previous speakers have already said, most water is used in agriculture. So a lot of the initiatives that I am currently seeing are initiatives that the water footprint, and there are many more. What I want to do today, I'm a bit skeptical and I'm a bit about these global policy science initiatives, and I will explain to you why. What I'm concerned about is how these policy initiatives privilege certain forms of knowing water and certain knowers of water over others. How they make certain ways of representing water seem universal, and how they also make it seem as if water is the same everywhere. And this is a slide that I'm showing that was produced by some of my colleagues at UNESCO-IHE, and the slide was actually produced to show the importance of the Institute, because the Institute invites students from all over the world. And the slide is a representation of the map of the world with the size of every country in proportion to the number of scientific publications coming from that country. What does it show? It shows, of course, that the production of scientific knowledge is very inequitably distributed over the world. And now, if you have an old-fashioned positivist idea of science, you would say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where science is coming from, because the production of science should be objective, it should be neutral. So I'm not of that position. I think it does matter. And I think, actually, a lot of the research that ATREE is doing also shows that it does matter. It does matter where science is coming from, the context of its production matters, the identity, culture of its production also matters. So I don't believe that it's possible to have a sort of transcendent view of the world, to produce knowledge of the world that is as if it is coming from nowhere, a view from nowhere. And so that is why I'm also a bit skeptical about the policy science initiatives. So this is, I won't say a lot more about this, but Oh, sorry. But my talk is inspired a lot by science and technology studies and feminist techno-science studies, which all in different ways try to explain how science and society, science and politics are always entangled. What I will be presenting is based on the two projects that were mentioned in the introduction, and one project that wasn't mentioned. One is a project that is called Transnationalizing Water Battles, that is actually looking at virtual water flows. So it's actually looking at what the increased use of water for export products and for water-intensive agriculture is, what kind of impacts that has, both in terms of environment and in terms of sustainability of water, but also in terms of livelihoods. That is research that is focusing on Peru and Ecuador, looking at flowers and mangoes. And another project that I'm doing that is looking at what new investments along the Nile, how these are altering water flows. And in particular, that project, we are looking at how there are different ways of understanding these changing water flows. Today, I will focus on one policy science initiative, and I think many of you will be familiar with it. It's the water footprint. The water footprint comes from a very nice person. He is also from the Netherlands. His name is Arjen Hoekstra. He is a graduate from Delft Technical University, and he is a seriously committed and concerned scholar. And so that is why he started thinking very deeply about how can we make the large amounts of water that are embedded in all the goods that we consume, how can we increase the awareness about that? And that's how he came up with this idea of the water footprint. So the water footprint measures the amount of water used to produce each of the goods and services we use. This is the text that comes from the water footprint website. In a way, you could say the water footprint introduces value chain thinking in water. I think what is also important about the water footprint concept is that it, in a way, illustrates how much water flows, not because of any decision, governance or management decision that has been made, but water flows where, according to markets or according to prices. And I think that is very important, and it's also very nice about the water footprint concept. Now, virtual water, that was a concept, so it builds on the virtual water idea, the water that is used to produce crops for export. And the idea was invented by Tony Allen, and actually he thought that's an interesting idea because with virtual water, perhaps we can through trade, we can help alleviate drought in some places because these places can export crops that come from places where water is plenty. That was a beautiful idea, but in actual fact, virtual water flows don't flow in that direction at all. This is a picture of the desert coast of Peru, which is an illustration of how in a very dry area, crops are grown. In this case, this is asparagus. Asparagus are grown on the desert coast of Peru for export to the UK and to the Netherlands. In Peru itself, asparagus are not at all eaten. So it's an interesting. It is interesting to think about that. So in a way, what is interesting about the water footprint, I think I can best illustrate it with what happened on World Water Day when Arjen Hoekstra had a large article in the Dutch newspapers because the Dutch newspapers were paying attention to World Water Day and usually what they do is say, oh, we should be very cautious with how we use water and shower for shorter times, etc., and close your tap, etc., and don't irrigate your garden so much, or wash your cars with less water. And he said, forget about all this. The most important thing is, for instance, eat less meat. And so he was saying, well, most water that we consume is not the water that we use for our showers, but it's the water that is embedded in all the things we consume. So in that sense, the water footprint is a very powerful concept to raise awareness about that water. But the water footprint also travels, and this is what I want to talk about. The water footprint, in this case, has traveled to Peru, where the National Water Authority, ANA, I think in 2015, produced a water report on the basis of the water footprint with support from the Swiss Development Foundation and World Wildlife Fund and the World Bank. And what they did on the basis, what was in the report a few months later, they said, we will offer farmers a blue certificate if they promise to irrigate more efficiently. And if they promise to invest in more efficient irrigation methods, drip irrigation among those. So when we talked about this with irrigation engineers on the desert coast of Peru, with whom we worked, they were happy about it. Because actually, this idea for them was not a very new idea at all, because it's the same old idea that has always kept irrigation engineers busy, is the idea, how can we better match water deliveries to crop water requirements? Or maybe the question is, how can we rationalize the behavior of farmers? Now, this is a farm of one of the export mango producers on that same desert coast of Peru. He is clearly not someone, his name is Fabio, he works the farms together with his sister Matilda. He is clearly not one of the farmers who would be eligible to a blue certificate. This is what his farm looks like, and to irrigation engineers, this is a horror. This is a horror, but if you talk to Fabio, it is not a horror at all. Fabio has a very clear logic to how he uses his water. This is a logic that he calls pozza irrigation. He uses it, so it basically consists of basins, and his trees are standing in the basins with growing long roots so that they can truly absorb all the water, but also all the nutrients. They can grow strong, they can grow big mangoes. Fabio and Matilda have good stories about this. This is what their farm is like. And I have to go a bit quickly. There's a lot more to say about this, but my point here is, what if, as is happening in Peru, this water footprint logic through the blue certificate becomes the dominant water logic? What does that mean to Fabio and Matilda? Fabio and Matilda then will be told to change their irrigation behaviors on the assumption that their irrigation behaviors are inefficient. But actually, they have done this for centuries, and they have done it in the desert area where water is scarce. So their logic is based on using water very cautiously. So I'm afraid that if this water logic of the water footprint becomes dominant, their water wisdom, because I'm sure there's water wisdom in what they do, will be eroded or will even be destroyed or will disappear. My conclusion is that there's two conclusions. One is that that is why I say let's not talk. Again, my conclusion is that every knowledge is a local knowledge. So my question is, how can we compare these two knowledge, the water footprint knowledge and Fabio and Matilda's pozza logic? A normal way of talking about this would be to say, Fabio and Matilda's pozza logic is the local logic, the footprint is the global logic. So I think a better way of talking about it is to say both of them are local. The only difference between them is that Arjen Hoekstra's water footprint logic has traveled, and Fabio and Matilda's Pozza logic has not traveled. And why has Arjen Hoekstra's logic traveled? Because it's superior? We don't know. It has traveled because that logic is recognized and recognizable as scientific because of certain characteristics, but also because that logic and the travel of that logic is actively supported by sponsors like the World Bank, Swiss Development Corporation, etc. So it's also a local logic, but it travels. It travels because of how the world is organized and because of all kinds of reasons that I will not go into. And so I think there is merit in considering both as local. And by doing that, actually, what we can do is they can talk to each other and they can learn from each other. And so my second conclusion is that rather than having one, than trying to integrate and to having one universal best way of measuring, mapping, counting water or of irrigating, I think there is merit in recognizing that there are many knowledges and that also recognizing that these knowledges have emerged, have been produced in specific context for specific purposes, are useful for specific goals, like Arjen Hoekstra's water footprint is very useful for raising awareness among consumers about how much water they actually consume, but perhaps it's less useful for disciplining farmers and telling farmers to do irrigation otherwise. Fabio's and Matilda's logic is very useful for what they do in their specific area, and maybe their way of using water efficiently has lessons for other farmers as well. So my plea is for the two to enter into a dialogue, for irrigation engineers to study the practices of Fabio and Matilda and to learn from this and the other way around, opening up questions of efficiency, rationality, and wise water use.